Hello, everyone. So glad you could join us again for our Grief Healing Telesummit. Top experts share their best holistic healing methods to transform grief into healing and living again. I'm Chelsea Hansen, your host, founder of With Sympathy Gifts and Keepsakes, as well as Global Grace, the World Association of Spiritual Grief Healing. We have a very special guest for you tonight, Uma Girish. She is a grief guide, dream coach, and author of Understanding Death, 10 Ways to Inner Peace for the Grieving. Her memoir, Losing Amma, will be released later this year by Hay House. Very exciting. Her blog is called The Grammar of Grief, and she hosts a weekly radio show by the same name. Her passion is to help women heal their grief and to turn pain into purpose and live a life of joy and meaning. She'll be talking about shape-shifting your grief story. Welcome, Uma.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Thank you for having me.
Yes, our pleasure. You do a lot of exciting and interesting work, so I think our listeners will really like to hear what you are talking about today, shape-shifting your grief story. But curious, could you tell us how you got involved in this line of work? Because you do so many unique things and help so many different people.
That's a really interesting story because my husband, daughter who was 15 at the time, and I moved to Chicago in the spring of 2008. We had lived in India all our lives before that, and when we moved here, my plan was to come here and teach ESL, that's English as a second language, to immigrants. But life had other plans for me. 10 days after we moved into our apartment here in Chicago, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. So I got on a plane and I was back in India, and I was with her for 6 weeks, even as my husband and daughter were buying toothbrushes and mattresses and setting up our apartment with bare essentials. Anyway, my mother was my father's primary caregiver because he was pretty bedridden and sick by the time. So when she was diagnosed with cancer, I knew my sister needed help, and I went back to India and I spent some time with the family, about 6 weeks, and I came back. And when I returned end of July 2008, I didn't know that that was the last time I would be seeing my mother. She passed away in January of 2009. Losing my mother was just the hardest experience life had ever brought my way, because I had lived about 10 minutes away from my parents for most of my life, even after we were married. My husband and I were married. I was always available to them for any kind of assistance they needed. My mother and I would have long conversations on the phone. It was just a wonderful relationship that we shared. And so having this diagnosis hit me between the eyes was something I just didn't know how to handle. I had no tools. I had no resources. I didn't even have friends. I was in a new country. So along with being asked to navigate the territory of a new culture, I was also suddenly navigating the territory of grief, which is very lonely, as you and I know. And that just made me ask some very big life questions like, who am I and why am I here? And what am I meant to do with this life? Does everything end when I die, or do I live on? What is the real purpose of this life that I'm living here right now? And that just opened doors for me in the area of grief healing. First, I started to work with a mentor, and I worked with a grief support group, and I got on with the task of healing my own grief. And then I started volunteering in hospice and working with other people who were grieving. I started to read books and attend seminars and workshops, and just was like a sponge absorbing as much information as I could about grief and death and dying and loss. And that's how I empowered myself. I wrote my book, which is called Understanding Death, 10 Ways to Inner Peace for the Grieving. And one thing led to another. I started to write a grief blog. That led to a radio show. And today, everything that I do, everything I teach, and a lot of my writing revolves around the area of grief healing.
And then Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about your mom's loss, of course, and then it was just the anniversary of her loss yesterday. How did you spend that day, or how did you remember her? What did you find helpful?
Well, I cried the usual tears. Never does the feeling of loss go away completely. I don't think the passage of years will diminish my grief in any way. It's just that I look at that experience differently, and I feel empowered to be serving others from that place of knowing what grief feels like and what people go through when they experience that pain. But what I did do was I connected with all my siblings. That, to me, is a very important way to honor my mother. And conversations were a very big part of our family tradition. We would all just sit around and talk and share stories and laugh and cry. That's how we bonded as a family. And all of a sudden, when my mother passed away, I felt like the hub of the wheel fell off, and we were somewhat scattered and directionless. So from then on, I made a concerted effort that even if she wasn't here, as the oldest sibling in the family, I would keep in touch with all my siblings on a regular basis and keep the connection going. So as a way to honor her, I called both my sisters who live in India and my brother who lives here in the United States, and managed to speak to them, and we connected and we shared stories about my mother, and we cried and we laughed, and that was a beautiful way to honor her memory.
Oh, that's so lovely, and it's almost like you're carrying on that legacy of your mom, keeping the family together by doing that tradition, so that's really, really lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are going to tell us. Oh, let me ask you one other question. Tell me about, before we go into your formal presentation, the book that you did, your memoir. Tell us how that got picked up by Hay House, because that's pretty impressive. That's really neat to share your memory or to share your message to even a bigger audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, that, again, is such an interesting story. I had written a novel first, and I had put it away because I had queried it to about 20 agents, and 2 or 3 of them wrote back and said the writing was good, but nobody was willing to pick it up and publish it. So I put it away, and I said, what is the next project I'm going to get started on? Because I'm someone who needs to be writing all the time. And one day I come out of the shower, and I have this feeling that I need to tell my mother's story, the story of her loss. And so I started to write that book. I got it done, and it was 3 months later in the spring of 2013 that I traveled to India for about 6 weeks to spend some time with my sisters. And while I was there, I'd finished my morning meditation one day and had picked up a Hay House book, and I was reading it. And I finished reading and turned over to the back cover, and I suddenly saw the address of Hay House, India. Now, I had known forever that Hay House has an office in India, but it had never been in the forefront of my consciousness, so to speak. Now, all of a sudden, it was like that particular address zoomed in, and I was seeing it brightly and clearly. And something within me said, pick up the phone and call. So I obeyed. 2 years ago, I would have said, calling a publisher, that they're going to ask for an agent, and nobody ever talks to a writer, and I would have had all these barriers and resistance rise up within me. But this time I decided to obey and listen, and I picked up the phone and called, and I was put through to the editorial department. So I spoke to someone there, and I said, I have this book done. It's about losing my mother. It's a transformational memoir. And would you be interested? And I explained some of my background. And he said, we have a review meeting coming up. Why don't you send us the first 3 chapters? Which is what I did. I got off the phone, sent him the first 3 chapters, and he told me that they would get back in about 3 weeks' time. So then I went on with my vacation, came back to Chicago, and as he said, 3 weeks later I had an email saying, we like what we see, can you send us the whole manuscript? So I said, okay, one more step crossed, and I sent off the whole manuscript, And then I didn't hear from them for about 6 weeks. But I'm thinking the longer I don't hear from them, the better it is, because that means they're making some kind of a decision. It's not a no. So I was really optimistic. And the end of May, the publisher wrote me an email saying, I have just started reading your manuscript and I should get back to you by the 15th of June. So I read that email and something clicked in my brain. I thought to myself, no, you're not going to get back to me by the 15th of June. You're going to get back to me on the 18th of June, and it's going to be a yes. And the reason I felt that was because 18th of June is my mother's birthday.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, so that whole week leading up to her birthday, I'm talking to her every day and saying, you have to bring me a gift this year. You know this will happen because I lost you, and that story needs to be heard by the rest of the world. It's a powerful story, and you have to help me with this. And 18th morning, I wake up, I open my email, and it's a yes from Hay House. I just fell to my knees and sobbed and sobbed. It was just such a beautiful thing. I mean, this, Chelsea, is really proof that our loved ones are always listening to us, watching over us, guiding us and blessing us. We are never sort of cut away from them just because we don't have them in our physical space anymore, you know. This is proof that they continue to be in our lives.
Yeah, that is awesome, because your spiritual guidance, I'm sure, was guiding you to call Hay House.
I know, yeah.
And then you knew, okay, they're going to call me back on her birthday or get back to me on her birthday. That's
right.
awesome. And plus, I think that's inspiration to other people listening who have a message they would like to get out. Like, yeah, it's possible. Ask for guidance. Ask for spiritual connection. So, Uma, tell us your website address, just because that way people will be able to know when your book comes out.
Yeah, my website is www.umagirish.com. That's umagirish.com.
And also, I should mention, I believe you had a little free gift people can get from your website as well. So if you want to clue them in on that, that would be awesome.
Yes, those who visit my website can download a copy of my free report, which is called The First Year of Life After Loss, because that's when people feel completely adrift. They don't know what to do. They don't like how they're feeling. They want to stop crying or being so sad. Everything looks different. Everything looks the same on the outside, but everything has changed on the inside, and you feel out of sync. So I have a report which talks about what are some of the things you can expect in the first year of life after loss, the first special occasions, holidays, anniversaries, memory triggers, and some of the ways in which you can think about self-care, because self-care is such a big part of getting through that first year. So that's all available in my report, which is called The First Year of Life After Loss, and you can find this when you go to my website, umagirish.com.
Yeah, that sounds like wonderful information that can help a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that with all our listeners. And I think we'll all be looking forward to seeing and reading your new book. Very exciting. So yeah, if we can get into your topic about shape-shifting your grief story, which I think is very important because you inspire people to be a victor over grief rather than a victim, and to go on and follow their life purpose and all that awesome stuff that you want to do as a legacy to your loved one once you heal your grief and get through it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that process.
Thank you, Chelsea. That's a perfect segue to my presentation. So I'm going to start by talking why we need to retell our grief story. And it's very important that we tell our grief story for a couple of reasons. The first is we need to keep retelling our grief story for release and healing. As long as we keep telling our story, it's a way of reminding ourselves that this terrible thing happened to us. When someone we love is suddenly taken away from our midst, it's a huge shock. And telling our story is a way of coping with the shock of the event. It's almost like you are processing out loud what happened to you. And every time you tell your grief story, it's a way of telling yourself that this really happened. Yeah, these are the events that led up to the last moment. This is how my loved one looked. This is what he or she suffered from. And this is what they were saying or not saying. And we just have this habit of retelling the story, especially the last few days or the last few moments, over and over again as a way of reminding ourselves that this horrible, tragic event happened in our lives. The other reason why it's important to tell your grief story is because we all need a witness for our wound. So I told my story over and over again, especially because I believed that my mother would be part of the survivor statistics. I didn't think she would pass away. I thought she would beat cancer. And because I was so far away from her, I didn't even know how she looked. I really didn't know the nitty-gritty of her everyday treatment in the way that my sister knew how. So I think I believed that she would survive. And so when she didn't, and I got the news, the shock was so huge that I had to keep repeating the story over and over as a way to tell myself that this thing really happened. And I would tell anybody who was willing to listen to me and help them be a witness to my wound. Now, there are some indigenous tribes, which is very interesting, who insist that the story of grief be told only 3 times. They say it 3 times, and at the end of it, they stop talking about it. And we'll get into why they do that later. But as we're telling our grief story, we are just wanting someone to sit there and listen. We want someone to hold the space for us to contain our grief, to really just not butt in with any information or advice, but just be a calm, listening presence. Unfortunately, we're not all good listeners. We like to talk more than listen. So you want to move in the direction of expansion. And expansion involves moving away from victimhood. It means you stop telling yourself that, this terrible thing happened to me, and why did this happen? Why me? Why this? Why now? These are the questions we typically ask. Why did this have to happen to me? Why did this have to happen now? And why did it have to happen to me? So I talked about the indigenous tribes where they allowed the people in the community to tell their grief story 3 times and then no more. This was the reason why, because they believed that the more time you spent in the space of your grief story, the more stuck you were. It was like being stuck in quicksand, and it would just drag you deeper and deeper inside. There would be no relief, no escape, and you would stay in the same place. So we need to break out of what author Christina Rasmussen so beautifully calls the infinite loop of loss. So think about your grief story for a moment. It's like traveling down the same pathway. You're just looping around that story of loss time and time and time again, the same circuit. It's like driving to work on a same route. You see the same buildings, the same malls, the same trees, the same signs, the same landmarks. Everything is the same. That's what we do when we're stuck in grief. We keep driving down that same road. There's no change of scenery. But we know that we need to shift the scenery in order to be able to reconnect and re-engage with life. We need to be able to re-enter life. And so expansion, which is about shifting your grief story, focuses on solutions. It focuses on looking for the meaning and the lesson in your story and making peace with yourself. This is a big part of the healing process, because when you don't accept what happened to you and try to look at it through a different prism, then you stay stuck where you are and you stay contracted. But nobody likes to be contracted, right? Because we are all love and joy at the core of who we are. Joy is our divine default setting, I like to say. And so we all want to find our way back to joy. One of the things I hear in my work in hospice from bereaved family members is, how long will I be crying? How long is this going to last? When will I want to wake up and in the morning and, feel joy again? When will I start to feel like the person I used to be? I used to do all these wonderful things. I don't seem to have the energy for anything anymore. Now, why do they say that? Because we are all drawn to joy. We all want to engage with life. That's who we are at the core. And that's a big reason why we need to shape-shift our grief story. Dr. Rick Hansen, who's a psychologist and brain researcher, says that our brains are Velcro for negativity and Teflon for positivity. Yeah, this is such a wonderful metaphor, but I think he's spot on because think about it. Our brains are Velcro for negativity. We hold on to everything that's negative, that doesn't serve us for much longer than all the positive experiences that life brings us. I mean, for instance, just today, if you think about how many people said good things to you, how many people paid you a compliment versus that one person who insulted you, you are going to hang on to that insult and remember it and revisit it and chew on it until it drives you crazy. That's just the way our brains are wired. Our brains are hardwired for negativity, unfortunately. So I love that he calls the negativity Velcro and the positivity Teflon, because positive experiences slide right off us, just as, negative experiences stick like Velcro. We think 60,000 thoughts a day. Just imagine that. That's one thought per second during every waking hour. Now, of those 60,000 thoughts, 95% are the same thoughts you had yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. Get this, 80% of those thoughts are negative. That means most of us are walking around thinking something like 45,000 negative thoughts every single day. You and I know, Chelsea, that when we are grieving, we are living in the space of negativity. We are thinking about, why did this happen to me? And, life is unfair. We are just caught in that spiral of negative thoughts for days and weeks. The thoughts we think are, I'll never be happy again. I'm going to be so alone. I didn't sign up for this. Life is never fair to me. We just keep thinking those same thoughts over and over. And that's why it is so necessary to shift out of this Velcro of negative thinking. Now, Marcy Sharnoff, who wrote Happy for No Reason, shares a personal story in her book, which I really like. She was in this beautiful hotel ballroom addressing an audience of 450 people. So she's into her lecture. It's about 30 minutes into her lecture, and she's finding that her hands are growing clammy with sweat and her heart is pounding, and she's becoming increasingly anxious. The reason for her anxiety is a gentleman who's sitting on the third row. This gentleman keeps staring at her, doesn't take his eyes off, but doesn't smile at any of her jokes, doesn't nod in acknowledgement of anything she says, doesn't in fact give her a single sign that she deserves to be there teaching this whole audience. And so she focuses on him, and she's just completely nervous. Anyway, she gets done with the lecture, and as soon as the lecture is over, this man springs up from his seat and dashes across the stage to her. And Marcy is really nervous by now. And she looks at him and is completely taken aback by what he has to say to her. What the gentleman says is, "Thank you so much for your talk. It changed my life." And what she realizes is that this is the negative story that I was telling in my brain through this whole time of the lecture. And that was completely different from what this man was thinking and feeling and experiencing through the lecture. So it was her negative story, her negative spiral of thoughts that led her to grow anxious. Her heart was pounding, her palms were sweaty, and there was no reason for any of that. So the moral of the story is the mind doesn't always tell the truth. Don't believe every thought you think. But when we're grief-stricken, that's what we do. We believe everything that our mind is telling us, and our mind is telling us we're going to be lonely, we're going to be afraid, we're not going to be able to make it on our own, we are going to be unhappy, we're never going to know the kind of happiness we knew before our loved one passed away. And that's why it's important to recognize the spiral of negative thinking and stop that in its tracks.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear how to stop that in its tracks, because that's like what everyone needs.
Absolutely, yeah. Because it's so easy to stay stuck over there. I mean, to be a victim is the easiest thing. Then you don't take any responsibility. You make it all about life and other people and this person who abandoned you and died on you. And it just keeps you comfortable in a little waiting room where you're safe and comfortable and happy, and you don't need to do anything to change. But then when you want to experience joy and re-enter life, you have to make certain changes. And those changes first begin with the way you think. Because happiness is a habit. It's not a decision. I don't agree when people say happiness is just a decision. You decide to be happy and you can be happy. It's not true as much as you can't make the decision to be fit and have the body of your dreams. Fitness is something you have to work on. It's not like the decision you make to be grateful and everything just changes around because you can be grateful about everything in your life. It's only when you practice gratitude that the practice of gratitude is anchored in you. And it's the same with happiness. Happiness is a habit. So we have to, just like we brush our teeth and brush our hair and do all the things that we do in order to bring routine into our lives, we need to make happiness choices, and we need to bring in happiness habits that will shift the way we think. As long as we are retelling our grief story, we behave like victims, and that's the energy field we live in. That's the energy field our friends are going to feel, our co-workers are going to feel, our family members are going to feel, and then we wonder why we're so alone and no one wants to spend time with us or be with us. That's because we are trapped in that energy of victimhood, and we must make an effort at some point in order to move beyond that. Now, I'm not saying run away from your grief story or turn your back on it. Healing is very, very essential. If you don't feel what you're going through, you're never going to be able to deal with it and heal it. So feel it, deal with it, and heal it. But a way to heal it is by shifting the way you think and shifting the energy of your story. Because as long as you're telling the same story over and over again, those are the neural pathways that you are going to be strengthening. Now, for the longest time, we believed that once we got to be adults, we were set in our ways and no further change was possible. Now, the wonderful science of neuroplasticity is telling us something completely different. Neuroplasticity tells us that our brains are actually malleable. Our brains can change no matter how old we are. We can change our brain maps by thinking differently, by choosing to bring new habits into our lives, and we can empower ourselves no matter how old we are. It has nothing to do with age or how you've lived even until yesterday or the moment ago. So that's exciting because we need to create new maps in the brain when we are grieving. It's only by creating new maps that we're able to shift our grief story. And we can teach our brain new tricks. So in order to recreate happiness, you need to step out of that same loop, the infinite loop of loss you've been spending all your time in, and shift to a new empowering story that will invite more happiness and meaning and joy into your life. For me, that was connecting to the bigger story of death and dying and the meaning of existence. That's the way I did it. For the longest time, I stayed there too. I retold my mother's loss over and over again, and I wondered why me, and I went through that whole victimhood experience. But there was a bigger picture that was beckoning to me, which is that if she passed away at the age of 68, what is left behind? So in the time that I have on earth, what am I meant to create here and leave behind so that there will be some value to the life that I have lived, that I will leave a legacy? And that became my focus, and that's what shifted my grief story. I stepped out of the neural pathways that I was constantly engaged in by deciding to choose a more empowering story for myself. So what do we mine from our grief story? How do we mine the goal from our grief story? And for a lot of people, the idea that your grief story could contain gifts or could contain gold is simply unacceptable. And what I say to that is, you need to get to a place of healing before you are even ready to hear that your grief brings with it certain gifts for you to experience. So if you're enraged by the thought that how can you even mention gifts and grief in the same sentence or the same title, it's because you are still not healed. And that healing needs to happen in order for you to move beyond that space and to be able to receive the gifts that your grief brings. A good friend of mine, Therese Tapuni, has written a wonderful book called The Gifts of Grief. But she tells people who are very raw in their grieving stage not to read the book, because she says, you're probably just going to get mad at me for putting gifts and grief in the same title, in the same sentence. And you need to do some basic healing before you are able to receive the message that your grief could contain gifts. So one of the first things we can do is move from the space of why to what. So instead of saying why me, why this, and why now, we move and ask different questions, which are, what am I meant to do with this? What am I meant to learn from this? And if you look at the organization Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that's a great example of how a mother found purpose and gifts in her grief. I mean, her teenage daughter was killed by a drunk driver, but she went on to turn the tragedy and the pain of that loss into something so meaningful and so beautiful that it serves as a gift for so many others in the world. And that really is the purpose of all pain. It is for us to discover the purpose and what we're meant to do with that pain that serves the world and ourselves in a bigger and better way. Another friend of mine, Stephanie Cole, she carried a baby to term and delivered a stillborn, and that just devastated her. Stephanie's experience was that she didn't have anything to remember her daughter by. You know, she had carried her to term, and then this baby died in a hospital, and then she came home and she was feeling barren and empty. And that's the moment Stephanie decided that she would turn this experience and make it something different for other mothers who had the experience of delivering stillborns. And she started what is called the Sweet Pea Project, where she distributes blankets to hospitals and clinics and places like that, where when the baby, the newborn, is dead, they swaddle the baby in the blanket and they give that blanket as a gift to the mother, who can then take it home with her, and she has one little blanket to, like a souvenir, to remember her baby by, as a tangible presence of her baby that she lost. Now, not all of us have to initiate some kind of a grand mission, so we can't all go out there and do what Mothers Against Drunk Driving did or Stephanie Cole's Sweet Pea Project is doing. But we could do what is meaningful in our own lives. And what could that be? So for some of us, it could be that we make a list of values that your loved one lived by. Adopt some of those values, and that could be such a precious legacy. For instance, if your loved one was someone who loved to listen to jazz, maybe play music and honor your loved one's memory. Get together a group of friends who love jazz music, make it an evening of celebration. If your loved one was someone who loved pets and who was very fond of dogs, volunteer at an animal shelter. That would be a great way to honor your loved one's legacy. If your loved one was someone who loved to garden, Maybe there's something you can do with plants and gardening as a way to remember them and shift the memory from one of grief to one of empowerment, where thinking about your loved one brings a smile to your face instead of a tear to your eye. So moving to an empowered place helps us to find meaning and purpose. It's your way to find your way back to your life force. So I'm going to give you 5 questions that you can ask yourself to begin the process of shape-shifting your grief story. The first question you might want to ask yourself is, if your loved one were standing before you right now, what would he or she say to you? So you can use these questions as a journaling exercise, or you can use them as meditation prompts, whatever works for you. But get quiet, sit in a space that gives you some sense of peace, light a candle if you like, and just sit down and start to write. If your loved one was standing before you right now, what would he or she say to you? Would they say you need to be able to move on with your life? Would they say, please find peace and move on? Would they say, I'm happy where I am, don't worry about me? What would they say? I mean, you know your loved one best, so connect with the spirit and feel what they're saying come through to you. Question number 2, what next step would they want you to take in moving forward? So what does that look like? What next step would your loved one want you to take in order for you to move forward? Would it be to find a friend who understands you? Would it be to invite a new ritual into your life which will help you feel a little more peace? Would it be some kind of self-care? Would it be to read a particular book that they enjoyed reading or one that you read together? What would it be that would help you in moving forward? Question number 3, what has been the gift of this experience? So even if you're not in a place where you are able to consider this as a gift, just think about the smallest thing that comes to mind, even if it is, the gift of this experience for me right now is it helps me cry. Maybe you are someone who was not able to get in touch with your emotions and feelings very easily, and the loss of your loved one has moved you to a place of greater sensitivity. That could be a positive. Maybe that is something you're connecting with right now. Think about the gift of this experience and what it's bringing into your life. Maybe you are more empathetic to someone else who's going through some kind of pain or loss. You're able to step into their shoes and understand their experience a little bit better. Whatever be that gift, whatever comes to your mind, write that down. Question number 4, what new insights do you have about this loss now? So how are you able to reframe this experience of pain? For me, it was time to accept that my mother's soul was ready to leave the earthly plane. I wasn't ready to let her go. I wanted to hang on. I wanted to grasp. I wanted more time. And for a long time, I kept saying 68 is too young to die, until I saw that other people were losing their mothers who were in their 40s, 30s. Some babies lose their mothers at birth. And I had to shift my grief perspective and the perspective of my story to reframe my experience. So I started to understand that it was time for her soul to leave, that life wasn't being unfair to me by taking her away because I had 68 years with her, whereas some others don't even have that many years with a loved parent. So what new insights do you have about losing your loved one now? And the last question, what is the one lesson that loss has taught you? Is there any kind of lesson that you feel has come to you because of the pain and grief of this experience? Even if it is as simple as, I now know how precious life is. Or I picked up the phone and called an aunt I haven't called in years. Or I forgave my sister for what she did to me because I realized life is too short to harbor grudges. It could be any kind of lesson that's come to you. What is the lesson that this loss has brought you? So what happens when you write down your responses to these 5 questions is that you will begin to see yourself shape-shifting your grief story. And this is where it begins. This is where you begin to see the light. You begin to step out of the darkness of the loss, and you begin to invite the light, which illuminates this experience in a whole new way. So I'm suggesting that you give this a try, and you don't have to do all 5 questions all at once. Maybe you have the energy only for 1 question a day, and that's fine too. Even if you were to do 1 question a week, if that works for you, fine. Whatever works for you, honor it. Honor your grief experience as something valuable, but make a commitment that you are going to shift your story from one of darkness, of grief, to empowerment and light. Because that is the best way you are going to step out of this terrible experience and find and recreate happiness for yourself once again. Even if a simple step is for you to get up every morning and say, today I choose happiness. In this moment, I choose happiness. Even if you're not feeling it, even if you're not in a place to believe that that's going to happen, just say it. Just say it as almost like in rote fashion. You will find that over time, over days and over weeks, this reality will begin to seep into your brain, your consciousness, your spirit, your heart, and you will begin to find that you're changing, that you're healing in some ways that are not even known to you, that you don't even see right now, but you will shift. You will shift in very small steps, in very small ways, and your brain will rewire itself to a new way of thinking, a new way of believing, and that will be the beginning of your hope.
That is wonderful information. Thank you for sharing that process with us, and especially, too, all the questions that people ask themselves, all the negative questions. I'm so glad you could say those to the audience, because I'm sure a lot of people who are early in their grief experience think all those things, and they're wondering, how am I ever going to get out of this? Yeah. So I'm so happy you could give us, like, tangible steps to begin this process. Let me just ask you one follow-up question with the gifts of grief. And I understand how you're saying when someone's new to grief, they're going to be like, yeah, the gifts of grief. You know where you can put that? You know how you kind of said that, but said it much nicer. How do you think someone kind of knows when they're ready to start accepting the gifts, just like naturally? Or, you know, because I know we all have to grieve our loss and heal. Is there like guideposts that you could perhaps give to the audience? Like maybe when might I be ready to even consider this concept, you know, if they're new to grief?
I think the first step is re-engaging with life. So when you wake up in the morning and you are finally able to tune into that bird singing outside your window, or you look at a flower and you have that brief moment of happiness, of pure joy, in that one instant you've been able to forget the darkness of grief and you're able to reconnect with the beauty that life offers you, that is the first step that you are healing. That's how it happened for me, and I've heard a lot of people share that that's how they felt that shift happening in their lives. Because as long as you're mired in that darkness, you are completely shut down. You're not open to anything else that's going on around you. It's just like being in a bubble that you're trapped in where there's just despair and darkness and grief. So when you begin reconnecting with life around you, you begin to notice things, you begin to notice the light, your heart lifts, even if it's just a little bit. Then you begin to know that, hey, I am healing, I am feeling better. And the more you do that, the more those moments come into your life, the more open you are to receiving those moments, that's when your heart begins to open wider. And from there on, then you start considering what is the gift in the grief experience. So it happens in stages. It's not something that comes all at once, but then you're able to open yourself up to even consider the question, what is the gift in this whole experience? The gift is that I had my loved one with me for X number of years. The gift is that he or she taught me this. The gift is that, we traveled to all these places. We made all these memories. The gift is that I know now that this person would want me to be happy and move on with my life. We are not ready to even go to that place for as long as we are grieving, because we are attached to who we are in the grieving process. That becomes our identity. I'm someone who lost my mother, and I'm angry about it. I'm sad about it. And if I don't stay angry and I don't stay sad, I don't stay close to her.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line. That's really what happens.
Okay.
And we have to be ready to break out of that shell and move away from that identity. And the farther you're able to travel from that identity of a griever, the more you will open up to life. And the more you open up to life, the more you will start thinking of what is the gift in the experience.
Yeah, that's so helpful what you provided to everyone. And it was also very helpful, the other resources you alluded to, like other books and some other educators. And also, let me ask you one other thing in a different vein, and I should have asked you a little earlier. I think you had like something free you wanted to give the people, like to the first 3 people who email you. So it's kind of a reward for people who are live on the call.
Yeah, I love to give gifts to people. So the first 3 people who are on the call live, who email me, will receive a copy of my ebook, which is called Understanding Death, 10 Ways to Inner Peace for the Grieving. And can I tell a little bit about the book, Chelsea?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So this was the first book I wrote after my mother passed away. And I wrote it as a way to understand why she left me and what was beyond. So I came up with a list of 10 questions that I asked surrounding her loss. And it seemed to me as I wrote it that these are kind of the top 10 questions most grievers have and most grievers ask when they lose a loved one. So questions like, when will I stop grieving, and what is the meaning of death, and is there life beyond this realm? So I was questioning a whole lot of things. Why do good things happen, bad things happen to good people, things like that. So it's essentially a compilation of my answers to these 10 questions, and with each section I have affirmations and I have a meditation. So at the end of each section you can chant those affirmations, you can invite them into your life and do a little meditation where you experience the little teaching that I'm giving you through my responses. So it is a pretty handy book. It's a 46-page ebook, and a lot of people have given me wonderful feedback about how it's helped them. So the first 3 people live on the call who email me will get a free copy of my book.
And tell us the email one more time.
The email is, my website is www.umagirish.com, and my email is umagir@gmail.com.
Okay, awesome. And then for the people who aren't lucky enough to win, I imagine the 46-page ebook is like on Amazon, or you can get it through your website?
It's available through my website. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iTunes.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, because I think I'm going to be getting your book as well, because those are such important questions that everyone struggles with. And if you would like to take us out or finish the call with a meditation, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So get really comfortable where you are. Shut down your computer. Tune out all distractions. The next few minutes are for you and you alone. Close your eyes. and take 3 deep, slow breaths. Feel your neck, shoulders, arms, legs, back, every muscle releasing its tension. With each exhale, feel your body grow lighter and lighter and lighter. In the far distance, you see a tiny glowing light. This tiny glow of light is moving towards you. As it gets closer and closer, it grows bigger and brighter. It's a warm, soothing, golden light. As it gets closer, you begin to see the shape of this golden light. It's your loved one. Your loved one is radiating peace and joy and a beautiful energy of unconditional love. Your loved one is looking at you with such love in their eyes. Feel the love. The beautiful golden light washes over you. You're bathed in its warm, loving glow. Feel it in every cell of your body. The rays of this golden light are cleansing your cells. They're washing away the accumulation of sadness, the rage, the loneliness, the hopelessness you feel as you're grieving the loss of your loved one. Now it's time for you to look at your loved one and ask them a question. Look into their eyes, deep into their eyes, and ask the question, what are you here to teach me? What soul lesson am I meant to learn through your loss? How can I use it to serve the world? And just listen for the answers. Tune into your loved one. Hear them whisper the answers. As you listen to what's coming through, focus on your heart chakra, which is the home of your wisdom. The answers may come as words, images, a memory, or even a feeling. Breathe it in deeply. Tell your loved one how grateful you are for the time you had with them. Tell them how much you love them and honor their spirit. It's now time to say goodbye. The light starts to move further and further away. It begins to recede little by little. But the tingling glow of its love remains with you. It's in every cell of your body. It will never leave you. Feel it in your body as you slowly start to come back to your surroundings. Tune into the sounds you hear in your room. Smell what's around you. Wiggle your toes and your fingers. Come back to your body. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Take a deep breath. Thank you, Chelsea, for this opportunity to share with all your listeners something that I feel passionate about and love to teach.
Yeah, thanks again, Uma. Your information was just so very helpful. And I also should mention to listeners, the call is live, of course. The recording is available up to 48 hours. And then after that, if you want to preserve a copy of the recordings, you certainly can purchase them. And with all the great information that we received from you and other speakers, I think people will want to probably purchase the recordings because this information, again, is just so helpful. I know I sound like a broken record, but it truly is because it's such a hard area for many people. And you really have given us tangible, usable things that we can put in place to work through our grief journey. So again, very much appreciated, Uma.
Thank you so much. And if I may just add, what you said
Sure.
is so true, because these recordings will remain with you guys, and you can carry them with you when you go on your walk, or you can play them in the car. And the more you listen to them, like I said, you're going to rewire your neural pathways, and the healing is going to be very, very beneficial. Every time you listen to this, you're going to be reminded of what's true, what's empowering, and what's real, and that's going to speed up your healing process. So I think it's a great investment.
Yeah, thanks, Uma, for pointing that out, because that is such important work that you're sharing with us about how our brain operates. So that's something easy and accessible people can do every day. So some suggestion. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and take care, all of you. I send you love and blessings.
Thank you.